Thank you. Our next contestant, Phyllis Harley. Tell us what we should do to make the earth a better place for our children. Tell us what we should do to make the earth a better place for our children. Phyllis Harley.
Everyone is always concerned about the children. If you've ever seen The Simpsons, at least 2 episodes, there's the character who says, "Will somebody please think about the children?" It is always in our hands to help our children and help them create what our future would be. The 3 things that we should always focus on are community, education, and physical abilities. Everyone needs a community. It does take a village, but it also takes a village not just to raise a child, but to create our own lives in our own families, in our own groups that we are active in. Then we need education. Education needs to be open and free for all. In our society, we have a very great education system, but it still always needs improvement. And finally, we should always focus on physical activity. When we instill that kind of value, that physical activity is something important to our children when they're young, then that will carry them through their entire lives. So what we should do to help our children and make our children strong is develop community, make sure the education system is open and available to all, and instill a love of physical activity in all of our children. Thank you.
Timers, please give us a minute on the clock. Turn on the red light. Thank you. Our next contestant, Les Moore. Tell us what we should do to make the earth a better place for our children. Tell us what we should do to make the earth a better place for our children. Les Moore.
Wake up. It's as simple as that. I don't know what the right process is. I don't know if we're the cause of global warming or just a trivial little thing on the side that has no effect on it. I don't know whether or not we're destroying this planet. But I think most people go through their week without a thought of the impact they personally have on the planet. One could argue that the biggest impact we're going to have on this planet is going to war. And yet, I go to war way too often in my life. I'm easily insulted and I'm quick to respond, and that's where wars get started. And yet, it's not even a part of my consciousness on most days that the impact I'm having maybe isn't going to destroy the planet, but it may affect the next person's day. And And he may in turn affect somebody else's day. And at the end of that long string is the destruction of this planet through our own means. So very possibly, just waking up to the effect you're going to have today is all it's going to take to save this planet.
Members, please give us a minute on the clock. Turn the red light when it's over. Thank you. Our next contestant, Jonathan Dunn. Tell us what we should do to make the earth a better place for our children. Tell us what we should do to make the earth a better place for our children. Jonathan Dunn.
I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, my parents would tell me lots of things. And then as much as I love my mom and dad, they would sometimes do things just a little bit different, thus not giving me the best example to follow. So what I would do to leave the world a better place for the kids is I would practice servant leadership. And what I would practice servant leadership in is showing them the proper way to be happy. I don't know if any of you turn on the TV at night. I know I do once a year when Game of Thrones comes on, but the television set seems to share with us a message that might not be quite correct. A message that I struggled with my whole life. In fact, it's why I'm standing up here today. I watched a lot of TV when I was a child. And commercial after commercial told me I wasn't enough. So the one thing that I would do, I do it with my own children. My daughter asked me today, why are you speaking, son? Servant leadership. Decisions are made by fear or love, and I'm teaching my daughter through the own example that I'm setting to make her decisions by love. And I know a lot of us live the lie that we believe we can't make a difference. But if everyone in the world believes they can't make a difference, there will be no difference made. And we have to know, fellow Toastmasters, honored guests, that we all have the talent of being able to create a holy moment. A holy moment that puts us in alignment with the dream for our life to become the best version of ourselves. And if we become the best version of ourselves, people may look at it as something different, but eventually the whole world will catch on. And if we're all making decisions from love versus hate, our kids will have the most amazing world to grow up in. Mr. Contest Master.
Timers, we have 2 minutes. Judges, complete your ballots, sign them, put them in the envelope, and hold them for collection by the ballot counters. Timers, deliver reports to the Chief Judge. Of course, we have 2 minutes to do this. Nonetheless, I do not have them. Speakers. First, we need Gerrin's. So, speakers, I'm hoping that you all have written your title on that. Okay. Are the timers ready?
Yes, we are.
Please check the timing lights. Thank you. Let us begin the contest. We will observe 1 minute of silence before the first speech. Timers show a red light at the end of 1 minute. Thank you. Our first speaker, Gerrin Sprague, Things That Matter. Things That Matter, Gerrin Sprague.
What do you want to be good at? What do you want to be good at? I've asked myself this question several years ago, and the answer was quite surprising. So I'll ask you again. What do you want to be good at? And why aren't you there? Is it because of your butts? You know exactly what I'm talking about. I wish I could, but one day I'll travel. But if we just had enough money, we could. But where did that word come from? And when did you give it so much power? No more. No more. Don't you realize that word sucks everything out of the opportunities that life has to offer? No more. I'm reminded of last night. 10:45, I'm scrolling through my phone, checking up on Facebook, and I receive a message from someone I had never met before. Someone from Madison, Alabama. It wrote, "Gerrin, are you still in business?" A little reluctant and hesitant to respond, I paused. Then I said, "Well, yes. How may I help?" "You left a testimonial on an online site 10 years ago, and I wanted to validate if you still felt the same way." Go on. "I am growing my business, and I'm having challenges doing so. And I want to know if this company will help me." After a few text messages back and forth, he reached out and he said, "Do you mind calling me?" 11:15 at night, when I should be in bed laying next to my wife, I am on the phone speaking to someone I had never met before, helping him because he was scouring the internet, looking for answers, teetering on the brink of who knows what, and he needed answers now. The question is, was I prepared? So we spoke for a while, and he felt confident in moving forward. He went to bed. Haven't you heard? There are people waiting on you to make the commitment and give to life what it deserves. People are depending on you to make a difference. They're hoping and praying that you will make the decision to take on what life has to offer, so that through your experiences, they can finally say, yes. It's important. It's important to the world that you prepare yourself. No more buts. Now, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm just here to encourage you, like the Renee Hodges of my life, the Gordon Williams, the Josie Ann Sprouts, the Eric Harmons, the Man Upstairs. These are all just some of the people who are in my life as my support. As my barge, pushing and pulling this big knucklehead forward. Yeah. Who's in your corner? What are their names? I encourage you to appreciate them. Share with them the reverence and the valuing that relationship deserves. They're there to celebrate with you, to show you that this is what life is all about. Isn't it? We have a great responsibility. Each one of us sitting here today. When I look out, you may see people you know by their names. I see resources. I see people willing to make a difference. The greatest people in the world, Toastmaster. It is because of you that I stand here. Not to entertain, but to share with you what life has offered me. It's a gift. You too have a gift to share with the world. Les Brown says, there is greatness within you. And I believe. The question is, do you believe? I encourage you today to take on the challenges life has to offer. I encourage you to walk through life so that everyone you touch and everyone that touches you are left empowered because they have met you. These are the things that matter. God bless you.
Timers, please give us a minute and turn the red light. Thank you. Our next speaker, Jeremy Udell, Facing My Ghosts. Facing My Ghosts. Jeremy Udell.
All changes, even the most longed for, have their melancholy. What we leave behind us is a part of ourselves. We must die to one life before we can enter another. Anatole France, a 19th century French poet, said those words. And when I first heard them, I was struck by realization. I don't know if it's true for any of you, But in my life, some of the most trying, twisting, and traumatic moments have overlapped with times of change. What that quote helped me understand is that when I didn't fully acknowledge or embrace those changes, a piece of me that was supposed to be dead and left behind instead became a ghost. Mr. Contest Master, fellow Toastmasters and guests, are you haunted by previous versions of yourself? Let me provide you with some examples of the specter stalking my life. When I was 11 years old and living in Youngstown, Ohio, my father came home and announced, "We're moving to Orlando, Florida." My disappointment could be described in 2 words. Mickey Mouse! I was going to be moving next door to Disney World. I could practically smell the ocean as we drove that packed car down to Florida. What could be bad in Florida? Enter middle school. I had real trouble making friends those first couple years, but now trouble being bullied. I began to wonder what my life would have been like if we'd stayed in Ohio. That's when my first phantom appeared, Ohio Gerrin. Back in Ohio, my friends had gone on to play football and be popular kids. That had been me. Maybe I'd never been bullied. I began to see Ohio Gerrin as a strutting, smirking superstar. Complete confidence, ultimate control, and the perfect excuse for every time I failed. Dumped by the girl, denied the sales commission, didn't win the Toastmasters competition. Ohio Jeremy's always there to console me. Don't worry about it, Jeremy. It's not your fault. If you'd stayed in Ohio, everything would be easy. Life would be sweet. I've learned that when I accept that logic, I never improve or grow. My second spirit materialized after my wedding. I believe marriage is finding that one person you want to annoy for the rest of your life. And believe me, I started annoying poor Rebecca early and often. Bachelor Jeremy saw to that. You see, before I got married, I'd come home, plop myself on the couch, flip on the tube, and sit there till bedtime. Clean the floor. Why? Just be dirty again tomorrow. Laundry? Maybe if I need clean underwear. Or I could just turn them inside out. Needless to say, this attitude does not please my new queen. Clean the floor. Wash the sheets. Pick up after the dogs. Keeping her happy is a full-time job. And all along, I have Bachelor Jeremy advising me. Dude, you don't need to do that. If she really wants it done, she'll do it herself. I have learned to combat his misguided mutterings with my marriage mantra. Say it with me. Happy wife. Happy life. Perhaps my most dangerous ghost I only discovered recently. But I learned he possessed me more than 20 years ago. Back in my junior year of high school, I did a 2-month study abroad program. When I returned, it was all I wanted to talk about. I was obsessed. My friends tried to understand me, but about after a month of me yammering at them, they stopped hanging out with me. Completely cut me off. I was so alone. Devastated doesn't begin to describe it. And that's when resentful Jeremy took root. Not an outside apparition like the others. Resentful Jeremy lives inside of me, flooding me with negative emotions whenever I think about that time. I ball my fists and clench my teeth and say, how could they do that? How could they cut me off and leave me all alone? They were supposed to be my friends! felt that way for 2 decades. Until just recently, a friend said, you know, Jeremy, your friends didn't change. You did. Mind blown. How had that never occurred to me? How had I never realized they were the same? I was different. The friends I made after breaking with them, I'm still close with to this day. Understanding that it was my change that caused that division has helped me release that resentment. Fellow Toastmasters and guests, who are your ghosts? I do believe we have to die a little death every time we change, but I think there's more to it than that. There is a reason we have funerals, for closure, to say goodbye. I encourage each of you to hold a memorial service for the past versions of you that may be holding you back. Let today be my eulogy for Ohio Jeremy, who never really existed except in my mind. For Bachelor Jeremy, who hangs over my marriage, but who I can fight every day by remembering how my wife's smile uplifts my soul. And a resentful Jeremy, not just from high school, but for every time he wanted me to look out, I should have been looking in. Who am I? I'm Florida Jeremy. I'm husband Jeremy. I'm grateful Jeremy. Mr. Contact.
Please give us a minute on the clock. Thank you. Our next speaker is Jonathan Dunn. Start with your heart. Start with your heart, Jonathan Dunn.
Do you remember when happiness was that easy? When I was 10, I followed my heart and found happiness in everything. From taking care of stray dogs, to saving bugs out of the pool, to sharing candy. When I followed my heart, I didn't chase happiness. It was part of me. Until Hurricane Unhappiness swept through my 5th grade graduation. Before the commencement, Principal Flanagan pulled me aside. Mr. Dunn, as you move from the small school to the big one, you need to start thinking about what you are going to do and have in your life, or you won't be successful. Go out and get what you want. I was 10. This was my first sleepless night. I was so stressed. I got this huge red zit on the end of my nose. I looked like a clown. I needed to numb my feelings, so I turned on the TV. A Clearasil commercial came on. It promised me clear skin and more friends if I bought their product. Suddenly, The principal's voice was the only one I heard. I stopped following my heart, and I turned on the ego. It was me time. My ego told me to take my time and talents and get busy doing and having. I began to chase that lie. Candy sharing? Not so much. I now wore a jeans jacket to school, and I sold my candy for $1. 30 years later, I had all the artificial symbols of success. There was a car, there was cash, there was a castle. If only Principal Flanagan could see me. She would have seen someone who was empty. I wasn't a human being any longer. I was a human doing. Doing what? Just about everything, which meant just about nothing to anyone, anywhere, and would mean even less 100 years from now. My life wasn't happy. Life was self-indulgent. You can never get enough of things you don't need. We are born with a thirst for happiness. I was a little dehydrated. I began to question the principal. It's been said, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. 1 week later, a new client stepped into my office who transformed my life. His name was Jay Folk. Jay was all heart. Jay had this crazy, cool commitment to leave everyone better off. He never texted. Jay always picked up the phone. Who does that? We became best friends. If you knew Jay, he would never allow you to be a second-rate version of yourself. I wanted to be first-rate. With something I struggled with, being vulnerable, I went to Jay. John, any fool can make life complicated. The key I focus on is simple and available to everyone. Son, I want you to start with your heart. It's the only way you will know what matters. Are you wondering, like me, could life be that simple? Truth was learned firsthand. Jay dropped off the grid. Weeks later, he called. Jay, where have you been? I've been so worried about you. I'm dying. Got cancer. I've been going through chemo. I just want to feel normal again. I just want to be able to squeeze my wife's hand and take her on a date. Will you help? I did what I had known as a 10-year-old. Start with my heart. Nothing mattered besides helping Jay. Day in and day out, I went and showed up for him and lifted him and encouraged him to keep fighting. And weeks later, he was able to squeeze his wife's hand and take her on a date and feel normal. I was smiling ear to ear that night, tears streaming down my cheeks. Hope will do that to you. But sadly, there wouldn't be a second date. Jay's organs began to fail. He went into intensive care. Under the guise that I was Jay's son, I went to see him. I squeezed his hand that night and I told him, you saved me. You gave me something I could feel. Something we can all feel if we want to lead a truly rich life. He told me one last time, start with my heart. Jay died the very next day. The loss almost killed me, but I found so much meaning in our time together. I rediscovered my heart, and I realized life is about doing what our heart calls us to do. Things that leave everyone better off and having more happiness than we could ever imagine. Fellow Toastmasters, honored guests, I appeal to you all. Consider Jay's advice. What could be better in your own life if you start with your heart? Perhaps everything. Mr. Toastmaster.
Timers, please give us a moment. Thank you. Our next contestant, Les Maurer. Les Maurer. Simply tragic, Les Maurer.
Is there anyone in the room that knows first aid? Please raise your hand. Thank you. I owe my life to you. At least people like you. And so many of my friends and my loved ones owe their lives and their well-being to people who took a little of their time to learn the very basics of life-saving skills. I particularly need that. Somebody once described me as a disaster looking for a scene on which to manifest. I was 12 years old. I remember being as excited as a 12-year-old can possibly be, and believe me, that's very exciting, as I left on my first Boy Scout camp. I was nowhere near as excited as I was the next morning when I came a little too close to a copperhead snake who had intentions on my being. A little later on in life, maybe a decade, I was working on my first car. And I went and took a grinder and I threw a piece of steel right into that eye. A dozen years after that, it wasn't me. I walked out on my back porch on the cool deck and looked into the beautiful pool and saw my even more beautiful daughter laying on the bottom. My life could have been simply tragic. But it wasn't, because there was always someone that knew the basics of first aid, that could come and transform near disaster into a really good story to tell. That wasn't the end of it. I've done lots of other things. I cut that finger almost completely off, arterial blood all over the place. Again, someone close by. And then I just heard recently a story about a young girl, 16 years old, standing at the edge of a bridge, feet over the edge, talking to herself. She She knew one thing for sure: she couldn't go back to school. She was well more ashamed than she'd ever be able to face somebody else. And it was not a tragedy there either. For exactly the same reason, somebody knew the basics of first aid for mental health. How many people would have known just the right thing to say to that young girl? Not me. I am learning. First thing I did, and it was a very smart thing, I married a mental health therapist. But I haven't stopped there. I am committing myself through several avenues to learning those basic signs of somebody who's in a crisis. You see, we don't like to talk about mental health crises. I mean, getting bit by a snake, that's okay. But getting depressed, well, it's just not as good a story. And saying the wrong thing or applying the wrong techniques to somebody who simply can't imagine another day is as disastrous as using the wrong physical first aid. But they don't teach mental health first aid in kindergarten or in the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts or down at the YMCA. It's just not done. So what I'm going to do is ask each of you to think if there's a way that you can educate yourself. To convince yourself that it's as important for you in this day and age to be able to see the signs of somebody on the border of crisis. Because it's happening all around us. Certainly, suicide is the second leading cause of death in teenagers. But it's not just teenagers. Young moms. Young men unable to find work can fall into a depression that's very hard to come out from. Middle-aged people suddenly realize that these beautiful children are really very annoying. After a while, they start to wonder what it is that makes them get up every day and do it again and again. There are skills just as real and tangible and learnable as any other first aid that you can avail yourself of. And as Toastmasters, I want you, because you've gone out of your way to make contact with people on a greater level than most, pick up this cause to learn for yourself and to teach others how to make this difference. I'm learning these things so I recognize them in myself as well as in my friends. Because I've just learned one last statistic. The highest incidence of suicide in the United States is in elderly men. That's me. When you wake up in the morning and you realize nobody really depends on you anymore. I want to be able to see it. I want you to. And when you do, when you know what to say to me, Mr. Contis.
Timers, please give us a minute of time.